Hi, everyone, and welcome to the lineup. Today is October the 21st, 2021, and I have to start the program today by wishing our very first grand princess, our oldest granddaughter, Ava Grace, a happy 15th birthday, a big day of celebration. So happy birthday, Ava Grace. And on with the program. And thank you for the very encouraging comments last week of having Mike McIntosh on. Mike will be back in the future. I'm working on some other guests. And, with the whole COVID thing, we've had to kind of mix things up, get a studio going at home and all the other things that were going on during that time. So looking forward to getting back in the saddle and have somebody sitting across the desk to be able to chat these things up with a little bit. And Mike is excited too. And he was encouraged by your positive comments. I'm very grateful for that. And we're going to do something that we used to do once in a while in the past when Mike and I were together. And I want to do the program a little bit in reverse. Of course, we always start with the nation of Israel, and rightfully so. They are the centerpiece of Bible prophecy as it pertains to the last days. And there's other things, obviously, going on around the world that are prophetic in nature. And this is one that I've always found interesting. I know I bring this up a lot, but there's reasons for it, and I'll explain that as we go. And we have talked in the past about the fact that, we're going to hear the term unprecedented or record-breaking frequently in the last days because Jesus said that there's going to be events of an unprecedented nature that increase in a birth pang-like progression as we advance toward the tribulation period. And we do know that the rapture of the church precedes the Great Tribulation, or as I like to put it, the Great Escape comes before the Great Tribulation. And as we're watching these things, we need to remember, watching them happen, reading about them, we need to remember to keep our eyes lifted up above the circumstances of life and on the prize that awaits us. Now, our first story comes from, this is the astrophysics page of a website called The Big Think, and it's got some of the world's supposed think tank experts and experts on all things considered important to those out in the world. It's obviously a secular site, but I find this to be interesting in that the first article says a giant solar flare is inevitable and humanity is completely unprepared. For the past 150 plus years, the big ones have all missed us, but at some point, our good luck is going to run out. The sun emits all sorts of space weather in random directions, and every once in a while, Earth is right in the crosshairs. And when a coronal mass ejection's magnetic field is anti-aligned with Earth's, it can produce a very dangerous geomagnetic storm. And this could lead to, listen to this, a multi-trillion-dollar disaster if we're unprepared, and we've never been in more danger. From the 1600s through the mid-1800s, solar astronomy was a very simple science. If you wanted to study the sun, you just looked at the light from it. You could pass that light through a prism, breaking it up into its component wavelengths, from ultraviolet through the various colors of the visible light spectrum, all the way down into the infrared. You could view the sun's disk directly, either by putting a solar filter over your telescope's eyepiece or by creating a projected image of the sun, both of which will reveal any sunspots. And this changed dramatically in 1859 when solar astronomer Richard Carrington was tracking a particularly large irregular sunspot, and all of a sudden a white light flare was observed with unprecedented brightness and lasting about 5 minutes. About 18 hours later, the largest geomagnetic storm in recorded history occurred on Earth. Aurora were visible worldwide, including at the equator. Miners awoke in the middle of the night thinking it was dawn. Newspapers could be read by the light of the aurora, and troublingly, telegraph systems began sparking and igniting fires, even though they were disconnected entirely. And this turned out to be the first ever observation of what we know as a solar flare, an example of space weather. If an event similar to 1859's Carrington Event occurred here on Earth today, it would result in a multi-trillion-dollar disaster. And here's what we should know about it. When energetic charged particles from the sun interact with the Earth's magnetic field tends to funnel those particles down around the Earth's poles. And the interactions between those solar particles and the upper atmosphere typically result in an auroral display, but the potential to severely change the Earth's surface magnetic field and induced currents cannot be ignored. And this is what makes space weather so dangerous. Again, this is a secular website talking about this. That's what makes space weather so dangerous to here on Earth. Not that it poses a direct threat to humans, but that it can cause enormous amounts of electrical current to flow through the wires connecting our infrastructure, leading to electrical shorts, fires, explosions, blackouts, power outages, loss of communication infrastructure, and many other damages that will appear downstream. Now, again, talking about this incredible potential disaster coming from a solar flare, the technical term, the coronal mass ejection, where negatively charged ions are bombarding the Earth. And it seems as though, in my mind, that this is going to happen in Revelation chapter 16, where we see the sun given the power to scorch men's bodies and burn them on the surface of the skin. Now, to me, that sounds like a radioactive burn, radiation poisoning, or something along those lines, because it's only temporary, just like a coronal mass ejection. It impacts things for a brief period of time. But the other part about this that I find to be interesting is because we are told during the tribulation there's going to be signs in the heavens. Now, the curious part about this for me, and why I wanted to bring this up today, and we'll talk about a couple of other things that are using like terminology, like unprecedented or record breaking, and is because in Daniel 11, we see with the invasions and the forays into Israel and other portions of the world that are made by the Antichrist, they're made on horseback. And then we find the same thing in Ezekiel 38. We're told the very archaic weaponry of the invading armies into Israel. We're told they have shields and bucklers, kind of old school, almost medieval type armaments. And they're carrying swords and they're on horses. And then we find the same thing mentioned in Revelation chapter 11, where there's an army of some 200 million horsemen. I personally believe that likely points to a demonic force, but some see it as an actual literal force of horsemen. But why would people revert to this type of warfare when we've got the mechanized warfare that we have today? Modern warfare is fought with drones and electronic engagement and equipment and all of the other cyber warfare things that we're seeing going on today. What could disable all of that? Well, a coronal mass ejection. And here we have an astrophysics website saying it's coming. It's going to happen. And I do think that the Bible, as I said, records that without question, I believe, again, in Revelation chapter 16. So it's curious that we're seeing the possibility of something on the radar, at least in the minds of astrophysicists, coming into our system and having an event, as you saw, the greatest one on record, or heard the greatest one on record, was the Carrington Event of 1859. And what the article didn't say is it actually killed some telegraph operators. And as it mentioned, that they were lighting up and burning up, even though they weren't even connected. It burned up wires all across the country when this event took place. And just think about it today. If everything that was electronic was disabled, how can we conduct business? What if it disabled all the computers on the cars around the planet? How are you going to fight? All the modernized weaponry that relies on computer-driven software. What if all that is disabled? Well, what's going to happen? Then the battles are going to be fought on horseback with shields and with bucklers and swords. So just wanted to throw that out there. It's something we usually tag in on the end of the program, but I thought because of the source of this article and it being a secular website at that, it's kind of interesting that they're concerned about an event of such a magnitude that it would be a multi-trillion-dollar event on the Earth. Now, again, same kind of language. Scientific American talks about the largest known undersea volcanic eruption explains odd seismic waves. And again, remember, Jesus talked about the increase of seismic activity. And that word seismos, as I've pointed out many times in the past, is not limited to geological events. It can also be translated as a gale or a tempest, meaning atmospheric events. And here you've kind of got a combo of those things happening. You've got the world's largest known undersea volcanic eruption creating odd seismic waves. And starting in the spring of 2018, experts around the world were puzzled over strange seismic waves that no one actually felt, but that were recorded globally by seismometers. Volcanic activity on the seafloor off the French island of Mayotte in the Indian Ocean was quickly suspected because such strings of seismic events or swarm quakes regularly occur when volcanoes stir. In fact, the tremors could ultimately be traced back to the eruption of a huge magma chamber in the region. And the eruption is the largest ever recorded before the sea, writes Natalie Foulet of the French National Center for Scientific Research and her team in Nature Geoscience. Since the beginning of the eruption, the new underwater volcano has grown to a height of around 100 or 820 meters in a place where there was hardly any elevation before. The volume of the fire mountain is estimated to be 5 cubic kilometers. This is the largest active submarine eruption ever documented. So here we go again. We've got an unprecedented type of event. Now, one of the interesting things about volcanoes, and there's a multitude of volcanoes erupting around the world right now, and one of the curious things that happens is they kind of create their own weather systems. When cold, I was just watching a video this morning from a geological website that I follow, that when cold air meets hot air created by the lava, that it creates almost a hurricane force or certainly a gale or tempest force wind that blows across the earth as the two cold and warm fronts meet. So interesting that we're seeing the largest subterranean or undersea volcano, I should say, erupting, causing seismic waves on seismometers all around the world, and nobody could explain it. Who's the culprit? The world's largest volcano. Weather Boy, another weather website, obviously, says earthquakes rock Oregon's largest volcano. There's largest again. Just months after a similar swarm impacted the volcano, a fresh swarm of earthquakes is rocking Mount Hood, Oregon's largest volcano. In the last 30 days, 41 earthquakes struck around the slopes and summit of Mount Hood. In just the last 24 hours, 33 earthquakes occurred. Most of the earthquakes in the last 24 have struck the southern flank of the stratovolcano. Of all the earthquakes, the strongest was 2.5, which struck earlier today. The USGS Cascades Volcano Observatory monitors volcanoes in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, while they've classified Mount Hood as a very high threat potential. It has not changed. The volcanic or the CVO, the Cascades Volcano Observatory, has not changed the volcano alert level nor the aviation color code at the volcano as such. The current volcano alert is simply normal, and the aviation code color is green, meaning planes can travel in the area without risk of being impacted by an eruption. Now, here's the important thing. It mentions the Cascades Volcano Observatory. For geologists here on the West Coast, the most concerning fault is not the San Andreas Fault, but rather the Cascadia Fault, which runs through Northern California all the way up directly underneath the city of Seattle and up into Canada. And should there be a quake, and again, volcanoes and quakes, obviously, as this story says, go hand in hand, are a grave concern, especially when they reach this magnitude that potentially the Cascadia Fault has the ability to reach 9.0 or greater, or even 10.0, some have speculated. So the Cascadia Fault, and now you've got this Ring of Fire volcano, the largest in the state of Oregon, has now become active. And again, these are events that are going to reach their zenith during the tribulation period. There's a mention of a great mountain burning with fire. That could be a volcano that falls into the sea. Mount Hood's too far to fall into the ocean. I particularly think that describes a asteroid striking and causing so much damage within the sea. But again, we're seeing all these things and this type of language being used in all of these different stories regarding events that are reminding us that Romans tells us in chapter 8 that the whole of creation groans and travails and labor, waiting for its deliverance, because humanity isn't the only thing that fell. The earth fell as well, and thorns and thistles were introduced into the world, as well as the tectonic plates moving after the flood and all these other things. So all of creation is looking for its deliverance in the new heaven and a new earth. Now, another weather website, Watchers, has this as its headline: Giant hailstones pummel Queensland, likely the largest seen in Australia since records began. Here's another unprecedented type of story. And severe thunderstorms hit parts of Queensland, Australia, on October 18th and 19th of 2021, bringing heavy rain, giant hailstones, and tornadoes. The largest hail was reported in Bloomsbury and Yalborough, north of Mackay in North Queensland on October 19th. And the Australian Bureau of Meteorology forecaster Shane Kennedy said they've seen some convincing images of hail up against a tape measure with balls of hail measuring, get this, 6.25 inches. Hailstones, 6.25 inches. Now, we do know that type of thing plays a role, again, in the Ezekiel war scenario. We know this is, as Zechariah 14 says, the Lord is going to fight as he fights in the day of battle. How's he fight? Just ask the Egyptians back when Pharaoh wouldn't let God's people go. And what was one of the plagues? Great hail. So again, we're seeing these type of events and the language associated with largest ever since records have been kept, making it into these stories as well. So now, for the balance of the program, you're going to have to buckle up because I'm sure some of these things are going to aggravate and frustrate us all, and rightfully so. And hopefully they aggravate us and frustrate us to the degree that we get out there and tell people about Jesus, because he's coming soon. There's no question about that. We're seeing so many of these things develop, and it's not just the earth groaning and travailing. People are groaning and travailing as well. And we're longing for that come quickly, Lord Jesus experience that will happen in a twinkling of an eye. This story actually comes from NBC News. It's all over the media, but I just grabbed it from NBC News. And the headline reads, Dr. Rachel Levine becomes nation's first transgender 4-star officer. Levine was appointed to lead the U.S., get this, lead the U.S. Public Health Service Commission Corps, making her, this is a man who thinks he's a woman, making him, the nation's first openly transgender 4-star officer. You know, I think the hardest part about this is that this administration is proud of this appointment. And Dr. Rachel Levine, the nation's most senior transgender official, made history again Tuesday by becoming the first openly transgender 4-star officer across any of the country's 8 uniformed services. Levine, the Assistant Secretary of Health, get that, he's the Assistant Secretary of Health. He was sworn in Tuesday as an admiral, the highest ranking official of the U.S. Public Health Service Commission Corps, whose 6,000 uniformed officers are entrusted with protecting the nation's public health. Did you catch that? He is the highest ranking official in the Commission Corps who are assigned the task of protecting the nation's public health. This is a man who thinks he's a woman and dresses like a woman. But let me just say this as a side note. He ain't hiding that he's a man. He looks like a man. And it doesn't matter if you put a dress on him or not. He still looks like a man. And the fact of the matter is that somebody who is actually a biological, chemical male, genetically as well, chromosomally as well, who thinks they're a woman, is someone with mental health issues, not someone to be in charge of the health of the nation, protecting the nation's public health. Listen to this. This is a momentous occasion, and I am honored to take the role for the impact I can make and for the historic nature of what it symbolizes, Levine said in a speech at the swearing-in ceremony. I stand on the shoulders of those LGBTQ plus individuals who came before me, both those known and unknown. May this appointment today be the first of many more to come as we create a diverse and more inclusive future. Levine, a pediatrician who previously served as Pennsylvania's health secretary, has spearheaded numerous efforts to combat public health issues, including the opioid epidemic, maternal mortality, and childhood immunization. A graduate of Harvard College and Tulane Medical School, has also written on medical marijuana and pediatric medicine. The world has absolutely lost its mind, and this administration is just going right along with it. And what a sad day it is for our country. Now, more news from Breitbart. This story says, as the headline, Trump Surgeon General Adams blames unvaccinated for Colin Powell's death. They didn't take the proper measures to lower the spread. Former Trump administration Surgeon General Jerome Adams said Monday on CNN's Cuomo Primetime that former Secretary of State Colin Powell died because some Americans were not vaccinated. Listen, Colin Powell had both vaccines. He had taken both shots, and yet they're blaming his death on the unvaccinated. I'm going with, if the vaccine didn't protect them, the problem is the vaccine, not the unvaccinated. Anchor Chris Cuomo said, in terms of his passing and how he would want it understood, what do you say about the idea that Powell passing away being vaccinated is proof that the vaccination is not necessary? Adams responded immediately, it's absolutely untrue. We've got people out there who are in the vaccine resistant crowd. We've got people who have completely different agendas that have nothing to do with vaccines, as you mentioned, who want to divide us. We've got a lot of people out there who are just who react to misinformation. They need the correct facts. Listen, he was vaccinated and he died from COVID. Those are the correct facts, not the unvaccinated got him sick. The vaccine didn't protect him. And for those of you out there in the immovable middle, I want you to know there have been 7,000 breakthrough deaths since people have been fully vaccinated starting in January of this year. Did you catch that? There's 7,000 people who died who were fully vaccinated. That's compared to over 300,000 unvaccinated people who died in this country. 7,000 to 3,000. That says the vaccines work. 7,000 people died. Hundreds of thousands of people have gotten sick after being fully vaccinated. And millions of people have gotten sick around the world with this and have completely recovered. We have to remember, too, 90% of the population hasn't even had COVID. And it isn't, it is a pandemic to be sure, but not everyone is getting sick from this. And he continued, of those breakthroughs, we know about 6,000 of them have been reported as people over the age of 65, as General Powell was. And, I have a friend who's now with the Lord, who was a retired surgeon with one of the hospital systems out here in California, who used to tell me time and time again, when somebody would die of this or that, and he would say, well, they died of being 84 or they died of being 92. We're all dying and we have to remember that, and we're all aging. But I'm glad that there is one generation that's going to skip that whole death thing and be taken into the presence of the Lord and meet the dead in Christ in the air and Jesus in a moment and a twinkling of an eye. And I'd be good if that happened today. I'm sure you would too. Now, this story, the next story, I think is going to help all of us who have been facing vaccine mandate decisions. We know Southwest Airlines first threatened to lay off without pay or suspend without pay all of its employees who refused the vaccine. And other companies are doing the same. I think 4 other major corporations gave out mandates even before the official supposed federal mandate has been issued. And this actually comes from a law firm in Florida called the Liberty Counsel. And the article says this: when the U.S. Food and Drug Administration announced on August 23rd it had granted full approval to the first COVID vaccine, FDA approval, mainstream media immediately ran with the narrative of the brand Comirnaty. And Joe Biden jumped in front of the microphone and told businesses they need to step up mandating vaccines for their employees. Dr. Anthony Fauci told national media outlets he expected a whole host of new mandates to be fueled by the, quote, approval, end quote, of the Pfizer jab. There's only one problem. The approval given by the FDA wasn't for the Pfizer jab that the U.S. market actually uses. And because this law firm and a few others looked beneath the facade and checked the facts of what the FDA actually did and not what the media and Joe Biden's administration said it did, we took some heat. They went on to say even some of our own subscribers questioned whether or not we got it wrong. No, it was the corporate media who got the story wrong. And as a result, thousands of Americans, no doubt, capitulated and went ahead and rolled up their sleeves, thinking they had no choice legally other than to succumb to their employers' mandates. Well, today, the Orlando, Florida-based Liberty Counsel, perhaps the most respected Christian legal firm in the nation, issued a press release that confirms the story. The Food and Drug Administration has done a bait and switch by announcing it approved its first COVID-19 vaccine in order to push the vaccine mandates and protect the Pfizer pharmaceutical company from legal liability. However, there is no fully licensed COVID shot on the U.S. market today. Albeit confusing and probably intentionally so, this summarizes the current status of the Pfizer BioNTech shots. All existing Pfizer vials numbering in the hundreds of millions, remain under the federal emergency use authorization, meaning people have the right to accept or refuse. The third, or the booster Pfizer shot, is identical to the above and remains under the EUA with limited use to certain categories of people. And BioNTech received FDA approval for people ages 16 and above under the name Comirnaty, but there are no Comirnaty doses available in the United States. In other words, there is currently no FDA-approved COVID-19 injection available anywhere in the United States. Every COVID shot in America remains under the EUA law, and thus people have the option to accept or refuse them. Now, the article goes on to say, under Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, you cannot be made by an employer to do anything that violates your conscience or your religious convictions, and that is whether or not it is FDA approved. They cannot make you take the jab if you don't want to take it. If you want to take it, go for it. We had a bit of a meeting at our church last night, just trying to wade through all the information and misinformation out there. And I think our main takeaway, I know our main takeaway is that we cannot let this issue divide the church. Division is from the devil. And God is not the author of confusion. And we are to be at peace with one another. And if somebody wants to sit in church with a mask, and we who are maskless need to greet them as brothers and sisters, and those with the mask on need to greet the maskless as brothers and sisters. And instead of allowing the enemy to divide us over this issue. And Title VII defines the protected category of religion to include all aspects of religious observance and practice, as well as belief. And this comes again from the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which is basically the Anti-Discrimination Act. And moreover, the EEOC has made clear, that's the Oversight Committee for the Civil Rights Act, that Title VII's protections also extend non-religious beliefs if related to morality, ultimate ideas about life, purpose, and death. And you can read Title VII's protections and just go to the website, type in, if you want to search this thing out yourself, type in the 1964 Civil Rights Act, then search below for Title VII. And you will find all this information that I've just shared with you right there. And everything in black and white from a federal website that is protecting the rights of religious observances, as well as non-discrimination based on skin color. Now, the Gateway Pundit has our next article, which says, what are they hiding? OSHA announces they will not enforce policy that requires employers to record their workers' adverse reactions to COVID-19 vaccine, at least not through May of 2022. In a dramatic shift in their enforcement policy that concerns the recordability of adverse reactions from vaccines, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration published a new frequently asked questions portion on their site, explaining that employers no longer need to report adverse reactions that their employees contract from getting mandated COVID-19 vaccines. The change was made because OSHA and other federal agencies are, quote, working diligently, end quote, to push propaganda that compels people to take the experimental vaccine. The Worker Protection Agency does not even want to hint at any appearance of discouraging workers from receiving the jab. And as a result, they are no longer going to enforce 29 CFR 1904's recording requirements that make businesses that require businesses to report on vaccine side effects. So I agree with the Gateway Pundit. What are they trying to hide? Now, Blaze Media, interesting story here, says Oregon mistakenly gives news outlets vaccine information for 40,000 state employees. They accidentally sent this to the media. A state administrative agency in Oregon on Monday mistakenly released the vaccination status of more than 40,000 state employees to news organizations in what is being called a breach of trust. And that's exactly what it is. A communications manager at the Oregon Department of Administrative Services sent a spreadsheet to the Oregonian and to Oregon Live and the Salem Statesman Journal Monday that contained the vaccination status for all executive branch employees, as well as whether they received a medical or religious exemption from the state's vaccine mandate. The spreadsheet also indicated whether an employee's vaccination record or exemption request is still being processed or if the employee had not submitted any information. Well, the stories will be forthcoming as to who was vaccinated, who has exempted out. And of course, this is an absolute, as the article said, breach of trust. Fox News has our next story regarding Pete Buttigieg, and he is under fire for claiming the supply chain crisis is due to Biden guiding the country out of recession. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg claimed that the U.S. supply chain was only strained because of President Joe Biden's success in guiding the country out of a recession, raised plenty of eyebrows on Sunday. Well, come out here and fill your gas tank up there, Pete, and see how well the president is doing at keeping gas prices under $5. They're nearing that, as we talked about previously here in California. The U.S. supply chain, and let me just add this, they were $2 cheaper under the previous administration, at least. The U.S. supply chain crisis has affected Americans of all stripes, despite White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain endorsing the message that it and inflation are high-class problems. Yet, Buttigieg told CNN on Sunday that the reason the supply chain is dealing with backlogs is because demand and income are up under Biden. Demand is up, Buttigieg said, because income is up, because the president has successfully guided this economy out of the teeth of a very terrifying recession. What he didn't say is a terrifying recession that they created. I don't think we have to look too far back to remember the lowest unemployment rate in over half a century here in the United States under the previous administration. Whether you like the guy or not is irrelevant. Those are the facts. We were flush under the previous administration, and now we've got people being told, don't expect too much for Christmas. Stay home again. Who's that going to hurt? Well, it's going to hurt all the retailers out there who don't have product on the shelf to sell. And yet Buttigieg says, well, it's because of the phenomenal leadership of Joe Biden. Now, author J.D. Vance, who's running for U.S. Senate in Ohio, and GOP official Tim Murtaugh also predicted future Democratic messaging for the American people. Buttigieg is still under fire for having remained on paternity leave since August. And Pete Buttigieg is a homosexual, by the way. They adopted a child, so he went on paternity leave as the supply chain crisis processed. His spokesperson defended his absence during the critical time. And for the first 4 weeks, he was mostly offline, except for major agency decisions and matters that could not be delegated. A spokesperson for the Department of Transportation told Political Playbook last week he's been ramping up activities since then. And Biden briefly addressed the supply chain crisis last week, announcing that the Port of Los Angeles will begin to operate all hours of the day in order to handle more goods. Well, we've been watching for months. We live about 30 miles south of the Port of Los Angeles and almost to our coastline here in Southern California. There are barges and cargo ships that are lined up awaiting their turn to get into port and be unloaded. And it's been that way for months and months and months. And it's because of COVID, because of all the restrictions and limited workforce and the shutdown and all the other things that we've been experiencing. Okay, now buckle up. I told you to buckle up earlier. Make sure you didn't unbuckle because here it comes. This comes from LifeSet. Colorado governor suggests children lie and get the vaccine without the consent of their parents. Jared Polis, the Democrat governor of Colorado, is telling children to lie to their parents and get vaccinated against COVID-19 without parental consent. This week, Polis encouraged Americans everywhere to get the vaccine privately if they have to, without telling their families what they're doing. And while he initially encouraged people to lie to their spouses, he seemed to indicate that children should secretly get the shot as well when he brought up the idea of a parent you live with who doesn't want you to get vaccinated. It's important to emphasize that this is your decision. He's telling us this is children's decisions. Polis said, according to CBS Local. You can still privately get vaccinated without your parent or spouse knowing if that keeps the harmony in your family and you're protecting yourself. It doesn't mean you have to share that with those you live with. He's telling this again to kids. And you can hide it from your spouse if it's going to cause problems in the home. Again, the stability of the home takes second place to getting the jab in the mind of this Democrat governor. It's highly disturbing that a lawmaker is encouraging children to lie to their parents and get a shot despite the fact that nobody knows how the vaccine will affect young people moving forward. And despite this, Polis has been a long proponent of getting children vaccinated. Back in August, at the start of the school year, Polis called for young people to get vaccinated and for them to wear masks in the classroom. And a new school year is quickly approaching, and it's critical that our students, teachers, and staff have a safe and enjoyable year in the classroom. And listen, one thing we need to pause and make note of, because big tech and all the censors out there don't seem to realize that being anti-COVID vaccine doesn't mean you're anti-vax against every vaccine, because our kids have to go to school with certain vaccines for the protection of everyone. I think all of us got vaccinated from polio and measles and mumps and other things when we were younger in order to attend school. Nobody's griping about that. But this is like mandating the flu shot to a degree. It's a virus that mutates, and it's going to follow the pattern of other viruses like the H1N1 did all the way back in 1918 to 1921. And remember that this is COVID-2. Well, what happened to COVID-1? COVID-1 simply mutated out of a lethal form or a contagious form and basically went out of existence like the H1N1 from a dozen years ago as well. It did kill some 12,000 people. Now, here's another story that's frustrating and for obvious reasons. Comes from the Associated Press, and that is Minnesota offers kids gift cards and scholarships for getting the jab. Minnesota will offer $200 gift cards and a shot at 5 $100,000 scholarships as incentives for students ages 12 to 17 to get vaccinated against COVID-19, according to Governor Tim Walz. Young people who start and complete their vaccine series over the next 6 weeks will be eligible for the Visa gift cards, but all Minnesotans under ages 12 to 17 who've completed their vaccine series anytime by mid-December are eligible for the scholarships, which will be good at any public or private nonprofit school in the state. The 5 drawings will be conducted weekly starting November 15th. We're launching this program to help reward teens for doing their part by getting fully vaccinated and keeping our schools, community, and state safe, Walz said in a statement. Now, if you go to the VAERS portion, VAERS, of the CDC's website, which is the adverse reactions log there, you will find it would take you weeks to go through it all, but someone has taken the time to do that. There have been, in 10 months, 16,000 people who have died from the vaccine. Over the past 25 years, there have been 1,700 people who have died from the flu shot and or the flu vaccine. So there is a problem with this, and it is killing people. And one, it got to market awfully quick. The previous record for getting a vaccine from research to implementation was 10 years. This thing came out in less than 10 months. So, to say that this is safe and we've had a track record and we've tracked it all is nonsensical. It's absolutely impossible. It couldn't have happened. And we don't know what kind of reaction it's going to have with young people. And yet here they are. Get the jab, get the jab, get the jab, when the FDA, as we read earlier, has not even approved it. The Associated Press, the next article headline reads, "Vaccines, Masks, ? Japan puzzling over sudden virus success. Almost overnight, Japan has become a stunning and somewhat mysterious coronavirus success story. Daily new COVID-19 cases have plummeted from a mid-August peak of nearly 6,000 in Tokyo, with caseloads in the densely populated capital now running in less than 100. The bars are packed, the trades are crowded, the mood is celebratory, despite a general bafflement over what exactly is behind the sharp drop. And Japan, like other places in Europe and Asia, never had anything even remotely close to a lockdown, just a series of relatively toothless states of emergency. Some possible factors in Japan's success included a belated but remarkably rapid vaccination campaign and emptying out of many nightlife areas that fears spread during the recent surge in cases, a widespread practice well before the pandemic of wearing masks, and bad weather in late August kept people at home. But with the vaccine efficacy gradually waning and winter approaching, experts worry that without knowing why cases have dropped so drastically, Japan could face another wave like this summer when hospitals overflowed and serious cases and deaths soared, though the numbers were lower than pre-vaccination levels. Many credit the vaccination campaign, especially among young people, for bringing infections down. Nearly 70% of the population is fully vaccinated. Then why are they scratching their head as to why the numbers have gone down from 6,000 a day in Tokyo to less than 100? Again, it's just so bizarre to see things that are basically self-refuting. The vaccine, but we don't know why the case numbers are dropping, even though they cite the fact that 70% of the population is vaccinated. It doesn't sound like they have a whole lot of confidence in the vaccine either. All right, off to the Middle East, and we'll wrap up our time together. Israel 365 says 14 Iranian army officers killed in a mysterious Damascus bus blast. Is Israel behind it? At least 14 people were killed and several others were wounded in central Damascus on Wednesday morning in an explosion on a Syrian military bus, Syrian state TV reported. According to additional reports from Syrian and Lebanese outlets, the casualties were Iranian officers. Syrian state TV showed footage of the charred bus, reporting that the blast occurred while people were heading to work and school. As of yet, according to reports, no organization has claimed responsibility for the blast, which occurred at a main bus transfer point under the Hafez al-Assad bridge, where vehicles converge and head out to different neighborhoods of the capitals. 2 explosive devices reportedly went off as the bus was on the bridge, the report said, adding that a third device was defused by an army engineering unit. The explosion was the deadliest in Damascus in years. Now, we have to remember there's a standalone prophecy hanging out there in Isaiah 17:1 that Damascus will cease becoming a city or being a city and become a ruinous heap. Now, many believe, and I would agree, that it's quite possible, maybe even probable, that Damascus prophecy being fulfilled will be the catalyst for the launching of the Ezekiel invasion from the north by Russia, Turkey, Iran, Sudan, and Libya. And interestingly, if you read carefully in Ezekiel 38, we're told about Togarmah that many other people are with them. So it's not limited to that. It could certainly include other Muslim countries invading Israel, or peoples invading Israel. So again, Damascus on the radar, and there is going to be a destruction of a city that claims to be the oldest continuously inhabited city on the face of the earth. So hasn't happened in time past. People like to say, well, Sennacherib actually made that happen. Well, no, he didn't, because there's a Damascus today. So it didn't become a ruinous heap, uninhabitable for all of eternity. So Jewish press says, Bennett surprised by U.S. pressure on settlements, Biden to reopen Jerusalem's Palestinian consulate. Israel's Army radio reported Wednesday morning that Prime Minister Naftali Bennett was surprised by U.S. pressure on him regarding the construction of settlements in Judea and Samaria. Now, the world calls it the West Bank. The Bible calls it Judea and Samaria, parts of Israel. According to the report, Bennett informed his cabinet members of the American hard stance on settlement construction, saying they consider this to be very important to them. Back in August, ahead of his first meeting in Washington with Joe Biden, Bennett told the New York Times that he opposed U.S. efforts to restore a nuclear deal with Iran and ruled out peace talks with the Palestinians. Bennett said he wanted to expand the Judea and Samaria Jewish settlements and did not want a consulate for the Palestinians in Jerusalem and vowed there won't be a Palestinian state on his watch. Now, that makes a very important point. Why would a country that doesn't exist have a consulate? There's no such place as Palestine. And, history tells us that all the way back in 136 AD, Hadrian, the Roman emperor, because of the continual rebellions of the Jews, forbade using the word Jew, renamed the word after the ancient enemies of Israel, the Philistines, Palestina, the Latinized form of the word Philistine. And the land was Israel, and he wouldn't allow two Jews to walk together. Hundreds of thousands of Jews were executed, and simply because of the continual rebellions against the Roman government by the Jews. But there is no country called Palestine. That word became popularized again in 1967 under Yasser Arafat, when he began to push the fact that they are displaced people, and the Palestinians actually predate Israel. He tried to draw a relationship all the way back to the land of Canaan, but an advisor told him, I wouldn't do that, Arafat, because the Jews were told to wipe out the Canaanites. So a bad move on his part. He quickly adjusted and shifted to the Palestinians. But anyway, again, this is a matter of concern for you and I as God-fearing and Christ-loving American Christians, because Genesis 12:3 still stands today. The Lord will bless those who bless Israel. He will curse those who curse Israel, and we need to be standing beside Israel. And in these last 73 years, that has brought benefit and blessing to our nation, and we have also been a benefit to them through the Abraham Accords and the things that were negotiated by President number 45 to move our consulate to Jerusalem, as well as the Abraham Accords that just celebrated their year anniversary. The Times of Israel says Biden aide raises normalization and meet with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan reportedly raised the notion of Saudi Arabia normalizing ties with Israel during a meeting with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, or MBS as he's called, last month in the Red Sea city of Neom. Bin Salman did not reject the proposal out of hand, according to a Wednesday report that cited the three U.S. and Arab sources. The Saudi Crown Prince, in turn, presented U.S. officials with a list of steps that would have to take place before such a normalization agreement could move forward. The report said those steps included an improvement in bilateral U.S.-Saudi relations after ties cooled since the election of U.S. President Joe Biden, who has been more critical of Riyadh's human rights record. Such an agreement would also likely require significant steps by Israel vis-a-vis the Palestinians, the report noted. And Riyadh has long stated it would not normalize with Israel until the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is solved and a Palestinian state is established based on the pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. That's what is said publicly, but we know what's going to happen biblically. When Israel is invaded, the Saudis will lead the charge in protest and ask the invading nations, what have you come to do? What is the purpose of this invasion? And economic factors will be the answer or the question that they ask. Now, again, Israel is going to find its place in the middle of the news because we are living in the last days. We are headed toward the 70th week of Daniel. We would expect to see them experiencing all the things that we're seeing them experience today, including the development of things like we just read. And what an amazing time it is for us to be alive. We're sitting here today. First of all, there is a nation of Israel. Secondly, the nation of Israel is almost a generation old, and we know the generation that sees their rebirth will not pass away. And we don't know how long a generation is. Could mean something as simple as whoever was alive on May 14th, 1948, at that point in time, not all of them are going to die before everything in the Olivet Discourse and the last days scenario plays out as it relates to the 70th week of Daniel, the Great Tribulation. Some pose the question 70 years or 80 years if by reason of strength puts us kind of at the midpoint of that, if that's your particular interpretation. But the fact is, there is a nation of Israel today. The fact is, there are the invading forces of the Ezekiel war scenario, many of them positioned militarily in Syria on the northern border of Israel. The predicted direction the invasion is going to come from in Ezekiel 38 and 39, and they are cooperating together as we sit here today. On top of that, the states that are going to protest this invasion have been normalizing ties with Israel, the Arab Gulf states called Sheba and Dedan in the Ezekiel scenario. And they are going to protest this invasion. And here, even though it's because of a shared animosity toward Iran, the reason for it doesn't matter. It's going to happen. And they are going to protest against the Persians because that's one thing that they share in common with Israel is a distrust for the Iranian regime. So again, so many things happening in our world today. What a wonderful and amazing time for us to be alive. We have to remember that the Lord told us in 2 Timothy 3, in the last days, perilous times will come. And indeed, they are here. Men are lovers of themselves and haters of God. The disobedience to parents and all the other things that we see. And so many of these stories, related to, let the young people make a decision. Let a child make a decision about their health. Listen, all the kids are worried about is what's for lunch, or if they're in school, when's recess, or if it's boys, when am I going to get to eat? That's what kids are worried about, and that's what they need to be worried about. And yet we live in a world where, as Isaiah chapter 3 says, the children will be in positions of power. That's a figurative statement, but it still rings true. And as Isaiah 5 also tells us, this is a time where evil is called good and good is called evil, and thus woes are coming, the woes of the tribulation, because that's exactly what's happening. We've got a transgender person put in charge of the health of our country. Someone who is confused about their own gender and denies their chromosomal arrangement as well as their genetic makeup, physiological makeup, and dresses like a woman who is clearly a man. And yet this is someone promoted to a position of power, great power in our country, and people are taking pride in that appointment in this administration. So what do we do in the midst of all this? We keep our eyes focused on Jesus. We keep talking about him. We keep telling others about him. And listen, I've said this over the years, and I'll share it with you here today. We need to remember we are living in and around people who are going to go into the tribulation. If the rapture potentially is at the threshold or at the door, even now, we don't know if there's a break of time between the rapture of the church and the beginning of the tribulation. It seems like it's likely. It seems like it would often actually be mandatory or necessary. But no matter what, the beginning of the tribulation is not far behind that. So we're living around people who are going to go into the tribulation. So maybe they're refusing the gospel now, but maybe we ought to just tell them what's coming, and our words will ring in their ears when they watch it happen. And then they'll consider the message of the gospel. So let's not be quiet about the hope that lies within us, and let's make sure we're always ready to give a defense to those who ask why we have such hope in such hopeless and bizarre times. So that's it for today. Once again, thank you for joining us, and please continue to pray for us. We've got a wonderful thing happening at the church if you happen to be in the area, and we're planning on coming by. Listen, we've been meeting in our fellowship hall in our church because our sanctuary has been under construction. It sat idle for many, many months, just waiting for permits to get approved and plans to get approved and all that. And so we've started construction, but because we're meeting in our fellowship hall, which has a limited seating capacity, we're moving out to 3 services starting on November 7th. That's at 7:45, 9:30, and 11:30 Pacific time. For those of you who join us online, that will be on the day that the clocks move back. On November 7th, we'll be shifting to 3 services. So again, if you're going to visit, and it's always a pleasure to meet so many of you who stop by to say hi, or if you're watching online, November 7th, 7:45, 9:30, and 11:30 at Calvary Chapel, Tustin. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for joining us here on the lineup for this October the 21st, 2021. I'm Barry Stagner, saying to you once again, we'll see you here, there,